The morning began like any other at the Santiago mansion. A secluded estate perched atop a hill covered in lush greenery, where luxury and power were displayed in every architectural detail. Pale sunlight filtered through the large glass windows, illuminating the high-ceilinged living room with its modern furnishings, creating an atmosphere that felt more cold than warm. Gabriel Santiago, one of the most powerful and wealthy men in the city, sat in his study. As usual, he was immersed in documents and computer screens, where every number and chart was under his control. It was the place where he felt most at ease, far from emotions and the things he considered weaknesses. Since the tragic loss of the person he loved most, Gabriel had not allowed himself to feel vulnerable again. He had built a cold, impenetrable wall, distancing himself from the outside world. This morning, the familiar silence of the mansion was interrupted by a soft, almost hesitant sound. Maria Alonso, the new housemaid from a poor rural area, stepped into the living room. She wore a simple uniform, her hands slightly trembling as it was her first day working in the opulent mansion she could never have imagined entering. Maria was not easily overwhelmed, but the grandeur of the house left her pondering the vast gap between her life and Gabriel Santiago's. Nevertheless, she quickly suppressed the thought, reminding herself that she was here for one purpose only: to earn money to pay for her bedridden mother's medical treatment back home. Maria's eyes shone with determination, though deep inside, she worried whether this job would be more than she could handle. Gabriel entered the living room with a cold expression, his gaze exuding authority effortlessly. When he saw Maria carefully cleaning the luxurious wooden table in the room, he stopped and observed her for a moment. Sensing his gaze, Maria quickly turned around. She was startled but tried to remain composed. "You're the new one?" Gabriel asked, his deep voice devoid of warmth. "Yes, sir," Maria replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm Maria Alonso. Today is my first day working here." Gabriel gave a slight nod. "Do your job well. I have no use for workers who just take the money but don't do the work." His words were harsh, but Maria simply bowed her head and responded, "I will do my best, sir." She returned to her work, though the pressure weighed on her. Gabriel, a man who judged people solely by their efficiency and productivity, had left the impression of a cold and distant employer. He soon left, retreating to his study. In the days that followed, Maria gradually adjusted to her duties in the mansion. She was meticulous and hard-working, ensuring that no mistakes occurred. Gabriel rarely interacted with her, but he noticed that the house seemed more organized and immaculate since Maria arrived. There was something about her that intrigued him, a determination and dignity in the way she worked. Despite being just a maid, for the first time in years, he felt a hint of curiosity about another person. Maria, too, became accustomed to Gabriel's presence, though he always carried an air of detachment. Whenever they crossed paths, she maintained her composure, never acting overly familiar or fearful. Her straightforwardness was something Gabriel recognized as rare among the people who had worked for him. The turning point came one day when Maria accidentally broke an antique vase in the living room. The sound of shattering echoed through the silent space, leaving her pale with shock. She knew the vase was of great value and that Gabriel would not forgive such a mistake. Kneeling down, she began picking up the shards, silently berating herself for her carelessness. Gabriel, hearing the commotion, quickly entered the room. His eyes fell on the broken vase and then on Maria, who was crouched down gathering the pieces with a remorseful expression. "What happened, he asked. His voice calm but commanding. I'm sorry. Sir. Maria said. Her voice trembling. I accidentally broke the vase. I will take responsibility and compensate for it if necessary. Gabriel frowned. He wasn't accustomed to this kind of response. Most people would have made excuses or shifted the blame. But Maria accepted her mistake and was prepared to take responsibility. Even though he knew she couldn't possibly afford to replace such an expensive item. How do you intend to compensate? Gabriel asked. His tone still cold. Though a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Maria looked up and met his gaze. I don't have the money. But I will work harder to make up for this mistake. In that moment, Gabriel looked deeply into Maria's eyes. He saw sincerity, strength, and a sense of self-respect, qualities he had stopped believing existed in people. A strange feeling stirred within him, preventing him from immediately scolding her as he had planned. Very well. Gabriel said after a moment of silence. It's just a vase. Don't let it happen again. Maria bowed her head in gratitude. Though she was surprised by Gabriel's unexpected leniency. That encounter formed a fragile connection between two seemingly opposite individuals. Gabriel, who had long hidden his emotions behind a cold facade, began to notice Maria more. Meanwhile, Maria, though keeping her distance, started to see that beneath Gabriel's tough exterior lay a heart that had been deeply wounded. The Santiago mansion, once shrouded in solitude, seemed to undergo a subtle but significant change. Gabriel began to recognize the warmth in the small things Maria brought to the household. Maria, though she didn't voice it, sensed the quiet care Gabriel extended toward her. Even in the smallest gestures. Their story, which began with a fateful encounter, slowly unveiled possibilities neither of them had ever imagined in their lives. The Santiago mansion, once quiet and cold, was now filled with an atmosphere of tension. Gabriel Santiago, a powerful man unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a housemaid, found himself frequently clashing with Maria Alonso. With her strong-willed nature and high self-respect, Maria was not the type to bow easily to anyone. Not even her employer. Every encounter between them felt like small sparks, ready to ignite into a raging fire. Gabriel did not hesitate to use cold and occasionally harsh words to maintain his distance. Maria, while aware of her position, never accepted being demeaned. Her independence and straightforwardness irritated Gabriel. Yet he couldn't help but notice her. One day, as Maria was cleaning Gabriel's study, she noticed a photo frame lying face down on the desk. Though she tried to ignore it, curiosity got the better of her, and she gently turned the frame over. It was a picture of Gabriel with a young woman and a boy, all smiling happily. The smile on Gabriel's face in the photo made Maria question whether it was the same man as the cold and distant employer she now worked for. At that moment, Gabriel entered the room. His eyes darkened instantly when he saw Maria holding the photo. "What are you doing?" Gabriel asked, his voice sharp with reproach. Maria quickly placed the frame back on the desk. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just cleaning." Gabriel strode over, picked up the frame, and placed it back on the desk with a force that made it almost slam down. His gaze was icy as he looked at Maria. "Never touch things that don't belong to you. Know your place." Maria clenched her fists but kept her head high, meeting his gaze. "I understand, sir. But I didn't think looking at a photo would be considered wrong. If it offended you, I'll be more careful." Gabriel was momentarily taken aback by her calm and assertive response. He was used to staff reacting with fear and profuse apologies when reprimanded. But Maria was different. Her dignity and frankness didn't soften him, instead. They irritated him even more. "You're certainly different from others. But don't think that makes you special here," Gabriel said coldly before turning and walking away. The tension between them persisted for weeks until a fateful night. It was a stormy evening, with rain lashing against the glass windows of the mansion. Maria had finished her duties for the day and was preparing for bed when she heard a loud noise coming from the direction of the mansion's gate. The screeching of tires on the wet road and the sound of metal colliding startled her. Throwing on a thin coat, Maria ran outside into the pouring rain. What she saw was chaos. Gabriel's luxury car had skidded and crashed into a stone pillar near the gate. Gabriel, seated behind the wheel, appeared unconscious. Without hesitation, Maria opened the car door and struggled to pull Gabriel out. He was heavier than she had expected. But her worry gave her strength. Maria managed to support him and bring him inside the house. Both of them drenched from the rain. Once in the living room, she quickly grabbed a towel and began drying him off. Gabriel slowly regained consciousness, his eyes opening in a daze before focusing on Maria beside him. He tried to sit up, but Maria gently pushed him back down. "You fainted. Don't try to move," she said, her tone firm yet gentle. Gabriel looked at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, though he tried to mask it with his usual composed demeanor. "Thank you, but you don't need to worry about me." Maria shook her head and handed him a cup of warm water. "I'm not worried because you're my employer. I'm worried because you're human. Sometimes you need to let others help you." Gabriel fell silent, unsure how to respond. For the first time in years, he felt his emotions slipping out of his control. Maria, the housemaid he had tried so hard to keep at arm's length, had become the only person by his side in a moment of danger. After that night, Gabriel began to see Maria in a new light. Though he maintained his cold exterior, deep down he couldn't deny that she had moved him. Maria was unlike anyone he had ever met, not just brave but also imbued with a kindness and warmth he had forgotten existed. Gabriel, a man who always prioritized logic over emotions, found himself confused by his growing feelings. He tried to dismiss his interest in Maria as fleeting gratitude. But every time he saw her working or heard her steady voice, he couldn't suppress his curiosity about her. Maria, for her part, kept her distance. She didn't want to read too much into the subtle changes in Gabriel's behavior. But she couldn't deny that since that stormy night, he had been slightly less cold. Even if just a little. The change in Gabriel Santiago did not happen overnight. But Maria Alonso couldn't help but notice it. The cold, unyielding man who once saw her as nothing more than a servant now often displayed rare gestures of gentleness. Lingering glances, his slower steps when passing by her, and the strange silence whenever they crossed paths, all hinted at a different side of Gabriel. One morning, while Maria was cleaning upstairs, she heard coughing coming from Gabriel's bedroom. Worried, she knocked on the door but received no response. Hesitating for a moment, she decided to step inside. Gabriel was lying in bed, his face pale and his forehead drenched in sweat. His eyes were barely open, and it was clear he had a high fever. "Sir, you're not well at all," Maria said, her voice a mix of concern and determination. Gabriel frowned slightly, trying to sit up. "I'm fine. There's no need for your concern." Maria shook her head and gently pushed him back down. You need to rest. I'm calling a doctor. No need. Gabriel replied weakly. I don't need anyone taking care of me. Maria looked at him. Her eyes firm. Whether you need it or not. I'm staying. I won't abandon anyone in this condition. Ignoring Gabriel's protests, Maria began wiping his forehead with a cool cloth to bring down his fever. She prepared a bowl of hot porridge and coaxed him to eat a little. Even though he was reluctant. Throughout it all, Gabriel said little. But his eyes followed Maria as if something within him was beginning to shift. That night, Maria stayed by his bedside, keeping watch as he slept. She couldn't explain why she was so concerned for Gabriel. Despite being acutely aware of the distance between them, she couldn't bring herself to turn away when he needed help. The next morning, when Gabriel woke, his fever had broken. He saw Maria slumped in a chair nearby, fast asleep. For the first time in years, Gabriel felt a strange warmth in his heart. A few days later, Maria received a call from the hospital. Her face turned pale when she heard that her mother's medical bills had been fully paid. Maria couldn't believe her ears. Who could have helped her with such a large sum of money? She quickly called the hospital to inquire. But they only said that an anonymous benefactor had settled the debt. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that it was Gabriel. However, he said nothing, maintaining his usual calm demeanor as if he had nothing to do with it. Though she had no concrete proof, Maria felt certain that Gabriel was behind the generous act. She wanted to thank him. But at the same time, it weighed heavily on her heart. She didn't want to accept pity from anyone. Not even Gabriel. Over time, their interactions became more natural. One afternoon, Gabriel was sitting in the living room reading a book when Maria entered to tidy up. He looked up, as if he wanted to say something, but remained silent. Instead, he put the book down and watched her work. Maria, sensing his gaze, tried to act as if she hadn't noticed. But after a while, she couldn't hold back and spoke up. Sir, if you keep looking at me like that, I won't be able to focus on my work. Gabriel chuckled softly. A smile Maria had never seen before. I was just thinking. You're not like anyone else. Maria paused, looking at him with curiosity. I'm just a housemaid. Sir, there's nothing special about me. You're wrong. Gabriel replied. You have something I've never seen in anyone else: resilience, dignity, and a warm heart. His words left Maria momentarily flustered. She didn't know how to respond because, deep down, she couldn't deny that Gabriel had begun to change in her eyes as well. But she wouldn't let herself forget the vast distance between them, not just in status but also in Gabriel's past, which he kept so tightly guarded. Maria could feel it clearly. Gabriel was gradually opening up to her. But he still clung to a part of his past. The times she saw him sitting alone, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, made her aware that he carried a heavy burden. Though she never asked, her curiosity and concern for him only grew. One evening, while Maria was working in the kitchen, she heard a soft noise coming from Gabriel's study. She walked in and found him sitting at his desk, holding the photo frame she had once seen. Maria hesitated, unsure whether to step closer. But Gabriel looked up and noticed her. Do you want to know something? He asked, his voice low and weary. Maria approached hesitantly and said, I don't mean to intrude on your privacy. But I think, keeping everything bottled up will only hurt you more. Gabriel remained silent. His gaze fixed on the photo. After a long pause, he spoke. "She was my wife. And this is my son." His voice broke, filled with pain. "They died in a car accident. I was the one driving." Maria felt her heart tighten. She didn't know what to say to ease his pain. Instead of speaking, she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. A gesture of silent understanding. In that moment, they both felt an unspoken connection between them. Gabriel, for the first time in years, no longer felt completely alone. And Maria, though still acutely aware of the distance between them, couldn't deny that Gabriel had become an important part of her life. However, they both understood that this budding connection wouldn't be easy. The invisible barriers, the scars of Gabriel's past, the difference in their status, and Maria's own sense of pride, remained obstacles they would need to face. Yet, in that quiet moment as they sat together, a seed of love had undoubtedly been sown. The fragile love story between Gabriel Santiago and Maria Alonso, which seemed to be blooming, was torn apart by a horrifying truth neither of them could have foreseen. Maria never imagined that the answers to her family's hardships lay right within the mansion where she worked. One afternoon, while cleaning Gabriel's library, she stumbled upon an old file on the bookshelf. Curious, she opened it and discovered documents related to Gabriel's father's company. The figures, company names, and events recorded in it left her frozen in shock. Maria realized that Gabriel's father was the one responsible for her family's downfall. Years ago, his father's corporation, a massive conglomerate, had bankrupted many small businesses in a ruthless merger. Among them was her family's small company. Her father, who had spent his life building his business, was devastated after being driven to bankruptcy. Her family lost everything. Her mother fell ill from stress and worry. And Maria was forced to leave home to earn a living for her family. The file slipped from Maria's hands, her heart twisting in pain as tears streamed down her face. It felt as if her entire world had collapsed. The man she loved, Gabriel Santiago, was the son of the man who had brought tragedy upon her family. Maria stormed into Gabriel's study without any thought of formality or courtesy. Her eyes red with anger and anguish. "Did you know about this?" she shouted, holding the file in her hand. She threw it onto the desk in front of him. Gabriel, who had been focused on his computer, looked up in surprise. He frowned at the file, then back at Maria. "What is this about? Don't you recognize it?" Maria choked out, her voice trembling. "This is about your father, his company, destroying my family. He drove my father to bankruptcy, left my mother bedridden, and took everything from us. My family lost everything because of his ruthless actions." Gabriel picked up the file, his eyes darkening as he read its familiar contents. The truth hit him like a storm. He had known about his father's controversial business dealings, but he had never imagined they were connected to Maria. "Maria. I didn't know," Gabriel said, his voice filled with regret. "I knew my father did things that weren't right. But I had no idea your family was among those affected." Maria's tears fell freely. "How could you not know? You lived in wealth while my family suffered. Do you know how many nights my mother cried? Do you know what I had to give up just to survive?" Gabriel stepped toward her, his eyes full of sorrow. "Maria, I can't change what my father did. But I swear to you, I never intended to hurt you or your family." Maria stepped back, her emotions a whirlwind of turmoil. She knew Gabriel wasn't the one directly responsible, But his connection to the tragedy made it hard for her to forgive. She looked at him, her heart torn between her love for him and the anger she felt toward his family. "I don't know what to do," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "I loved you, Gabriel. But now, I can't look at you without thinking of what my family lost." Gabriel remained silent, feeling the pain in every word she spoke. He knew the connection between them was now a wound that would be hard to heal. And he didn't want Maria to endure more suffering because of his family's past. That night, as Maria sat in her room, Gabriel knocked on her door. He entered, his eyes heavy with an unreadable emotion. "Maria," he said, his voice hoarse, "I've thought a lot about this. And I don't think we can continue this relationship." Maria froze. "What are you saying?" Gabriel took a deep breath, his expression cold as he forced himself to say the words. "I don't love you, Maria. This relationship was a mistake." His words cut into her heart like a blade. Maria felt as though her chest was being crushed. "You're lying. I know you don't mean that." Gabriel turned away, unable to meet her tearful gaze. "I don't want to repeat this conversation. You should leave. Go and build a new life. You deserve better." Maria began to cry. But she refused to beg. She stood there, heartbroken, watching Gabriel walk away. Though she sensed he was pushing her away for some reason. His cruel words left her deeply wounded. The next morning, Maria packed her belongings and left the Santiago mansion. As she passed through the gates, she didn't look back. Though tears streamed down her face, she vowed never to return and to rebuild her life without Gabriel. Meanwhile, Gabriel stood silently by the window, watching Maria's figure disappear into the distance. His heart ached. But he believed this was the best decision for her. He didn't want his family's dark past to become a burden for the woman he loved. Despite the distance, neither of them could forget the other. Maria focused on caring for her mother and starting over. But memories of Gabriel lingered in her mind. She wondered if he truly didn't love her or if his words were a lie meant to protect her. Gabriel, in his solitude, was consumed by regret and longing for Maria. He knew he had hurt her deeply. But he didn't know if he could ever mend the wounds he had caused. Both of them remained trapped between love and pain, unsure if fate would ever grant them a second chance. Gabriel Santiago was consumed by guilt. Since Maria had left, his life had become hollow. The Santiago mansion, already cold and empty, now felt even more desolate. Gone was Maria's gentle smile. Gone were the soft sounds of her footsteps in the expansive hallways. Gabriel realized that more than work and success, Maria had been the only light in his dark world. In a small town, Maria was rebuilding her life. She worked at a modest shop and spent most of her time caring for her mother. Though she tried to forget Gabriel, his image lingered in her mind. The pain from his parting words still stung. But deep down, Maria knew she still loved him. One day, Maria noticed strange changes in her body. She felt tired, nauseous, and sensed a new life growing within her. A visit to the hospital confirmed it. She was pregnant with Gabriel's child. Holding her stomach, Maria wept. She didn't know how to face this revelation. The child was a part of Gabriel, a man she loved and resented. Yet deep within her, Maria felt an overwhelming love for the tiny life growing inside her. She resolved to do everything in her power to protect and nurture the baby, even without Gabriel by her side. Gabriel buried himself in work to try to forget Maria. But the more he worked, the emptier he felt. Each passing day, his longing for Maria grew stronger. He realized that without her, everything he had achieved was meaningless. One afternoon, during an important meeting, Gabriel's phone rang. On the other end was a mutual friend of his and Maria's. Their voice filled with urgency. Maria was in an accident. She's at the hospital. And it's serious. The news hit Gabriel like a punch to the gut. He shot up from his chair, leaving behind the surprised stares of his colleagues and clients. Gabriel rushed to his car, his heart pounding as he imagined Maria lying between life and death. Gabriel arrived at the hospital in a state of panic. He raced to the reception desk, his voice urgent, "Where is Maria Alonso?" When he reached her room, he found Maria lying on the bed, her face pale, one arm in a cast, and surrounded by the steady beeping of machines. Gabriel felt his heart shatter. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his, and whispered, "Maria, please wake up. I'm sorry. I was wrong." Maria slowly opened her eyes. When she saw Gabriel, surprise flickered in her gaze, followed by coldness. "Why are you here?" she asked weakly. "I'm here because I can't live without you," Gabriel replied, his eyes red with emotion. "I know I hurt you. I lied when I said I didn't love you. But the truth is, I love you more than anything in this world. I was afraid my past would bring you pain, so I pushed you away. But I was wrong. Maria, I can't live without you." Maria stayed silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. She felt the sincerity in his words, but the pain he had caused her was still fresh. "Gabriel, you know our love isn't just about us," Maria said. "Your past, the hurt your family caused mine, it's all still there." Gabriel held her hand tightly. "I can't change the past. But I will do everything to make it up to you and your family. You don't have to forgive my father. But please give me a chance to start over." After a long silence, Maria looked at Gabriel, her gaze softening. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "I'm pregnant. It's your child." Gabriel froze, his eyes wide. "What did you say?" "Our child." "Gabriel," Maria repeated. "I wasn't going to tell you because I didn't think you'd want this. But now, I think you deserve to know." Tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He knelt beside her bed, placing a hand on her stomach, where their child was growing. "Maria, you don't know what this means to me. I've lost everything in the past, my family, my faith in love. But you brought me back. And now, we'll have a family." Maria looked into Gabriel's eyes and saw a profound change in him. He was no longer the cold, controlling man consumed by his past. Gabriel had learned how to love, how to let go, and how to sacrifice for others. A few weeks later, Maria was discharged from the hospital. Gabriel brought her back to the Santiago mansion, which had once symbolized loneliness but now brimmed with life. He devoted himself to caring for Maria and their unborn child. And he also helped her mother receive the best medical treatment. Gabriel began dedicating more of his time to charity work as a way to atone for his family's past mistakes. On the day Maria gave birth, Gabriel didn't leave her side for a single moment. When their baby let out its first cry, Gabriel held the child in his arms, his eyes filled with happiness and gratitude. The story ends with Gabriel embracing Maria and their baby in the living room of the mansion. The once cold and empty walls were now filled with laughter, love, and warmth. Gabriel knew he had finally found what he had always been searching for, a true family.